Alongside Jurassic Park Japan, Jurassic Park Europe was Hammond's second expansion plan, intended to place the world of dinosaurs onto a foothold in the Atlantic, more specifically on an island in the Azores chain. With a volcanic history, it's no wonder this island chain has been touted as the next Jurassic Park, with great transportation connections with Western Europe and the US East Coast. Jurassic World Europe would have allowed greater accessibility, especially to the prestigious British paleontology culture and the motherland of dinosaur science. Today we explore the candidate dinosaur species of Europe, a continent that was up until 30 million years ago separated into a series of islands and landmasses that were constantly fluctuating, forming isolated pockets whilst land bridges came and went, allowing temporary migration and influxes. The continent as a whole was a sporadic geological mess that gave rise to a peculiar mixture of dinosaurs. We start in the United Kingdom, arguably the richest source of fossils in Europe and the home ground of the birth of dinosaur paleontology. The Oxford Clay is a marine sedimentary rock formation, thus it features a huge deal of oceanic fossil specimens, particularly of fish and invertebrates. The dinosaurs that are found here are suggested to be coastal dwelling species, like the Mesozoic already present in the game. Eustreptospondylus is a similar theropod to the first ever dinosaur discovered, Megalosaurus. Living in Europe during a time when the continent was an assortment of scattered islands, it has often been portrayed as an island-hopping species with the ability to swim, such as in BBC's Walking with Dinosaurs series. And although scientific analysis suggests Eustreptospondylus was a capable swimmer, it is difficult to confirm this with or without using fossil evidence. Regardless, what the evidence has shown is that it scavenged on carcasses of fish and marine reptiles, and definitely lived close to the shoreline. As a possible dinosaur with traits of insular dwarfism or reduced size due to living on islands, it would add a small to medium-sized carnivore that would bolster the Jurassic theropod listing, but may otherwise be too similar to Megalosaurus or Metriacanthosaurus. One of the few herbivores that would have come up against Eustreptospondylus is Lexovisaurus, a fairly small stegosaur that was commonplace throughout southern England and northern France. However, since 2008, most of the French specimens are considered part of a new genus called Loricatosaurus, while some dubious English remains were reclassified as Eoplophysis, rendering the Lexovisaurus holotype to be pretty poorly understood. It featured a general stegosaur build with large shoulder spikes, while its nimble size, probably another result of insular dwarfism, would make it an ideal pairing with larger European or North American stegosaur varieties. The Oxford Clay is a thus decent introductory site for Europe, but its roster is definitely improved by much more productive and interesting sites. It however makes a bold claim for a marine DLC if there ever is one, due to the presence of rich marine fossils that I haven't covered. Small shout out to Calovosaurus here, which was referenced in some versions of the Jurassic Park novel, but this is believed to be a mistaken replacement of the Microceratops name, so I won't go through it. We move to our first custom site. Like the Oxford Clay, the overlying Kimmeridge Clay is a predominantly marine sedimentary rock formation, and generally paints an evolutionary snapshot of the next 10 million years or so from the Oxford. Like most dinosaur specimens discovered in the late 19th century England, Dacentrurus has had a very tumultuous paleontological history, being one of the first stegosaurs to be found. Although almost a dozen species have been named, modern studies have reclassified most to new genuses like Myrigia, Eoplophysis and Lexovisaurus as we discussed before. At this current time, generally 3 species are widely accepted today. However, the French specimens of Dacentrurus lenieri were lost during World War II. As a result, it is possible Dacentrurus is a direct evolutionary descendant from Lexovisaurus. At 7 to 8 meters in length, it was comparable in proportions to the large Stegosaurus. However, its plate arrangement was vastly different, as the plates made way to spikes after the lower hip area. It has also been portrayed heavily with shoulder spikes like Kentrosaurus, although no such paleontological evidence for this exists. As one of the most common, widely dispersed and understood herbivores in Europe, it thus should be one of the key stegosaur names in this expansion. Originally thought to be a species of the North American Stochosaurus, Jura Tyrant is now believed to be a distinct European member of the Proceratosaurs, early tyrannosauroids that prevailed in the smaller niches of the carnivore trophic levels in the Jurassic, before their eventual domination in the late Cretaceous. Nevertheless, Duratyrant is still poorly known owing to its very incomplete holotype. However, it is believed to be a medium carnivore with a slender and light build, making it more agile than the stockier megalosaurs it would have had to compete against. Due to its close relation to Proceratosaurus and Guanlong, it is also believed to have adorned some sort of head crest, but little skull material is found to back this claim up. As the first sauropod ever found, Cetiosaurus has also had a turbulent paleontological history, becoming a wastebasket for most sauropod specimens found in Europe during the Jurassic, with any resemblance to being a sauropod. Today, the Oxoniensis species is the accepted type species, featuring 3 more or less complete specimens, and thus if we disregard the dubious nature of all the other species, Cetiosaurus is generally a well understood animal. A primitive basal sauropod similar to its Jurassic Chinese cousins like Shunosaurus, it featured a relatively small neck, and was probably common throughout its floodplain and open woodlands environment. Featuring in England, France, with also possibilities in Switzerland and Morocco, Cetiosaurus is an interesting candidate for European sauropod representation. The Kimmeridge clay introduces us to some distinct and famous species, and is a better improvement over the more lackluster and earlier Oxford clay beds. Moving away from the coast, we hit the bedrock of the Chipping Norton limestone, and our second custom site, a Middle Jurassic Buffonian formation that is part of the Great Oolite group of stratigraphic units that are the discovery sites of the earliest and most famous English dinosaurs, including Cetiosaurus. Another of these famous names is Megalosaurus, and again, due to it being the first dinosaur found, it became a wastebasket taxon with a very distorted scientific past, rife with confusion. Today, Megalosaurus is known from 2 possibly synonymous species, in Bucklandi and Coneyberry, and was the archetypal Jurassic carnivore with a sturdy build, balance for speed and power, and no doubt a top predator of its time and environment. Only Torvosaurus and some instances of European allosaurs were larger than it. Due to its fame, a European DLC must include this iconic dinosaur. It's also a wonder why it hasn't made any substantial impact in the Jurassic Park canon. Although for England, the Bucklandi species should be considered, there are 2 dubious Portuguese species named from the Lourinhã formation that may allow it to be a possibility there as well. More on that later. Proceratosaurus embryo was successfully created by Ingen in the lead up to the first movie, and the dinosaur was believed to be soon incubated and released into Isla Nublar due to the construction of its paddock. As a result of this strong lore reference, the Proceratosaurus is a prime candidate for inclusion. Originally thought to be a predecessor of Ceratosaurus, Proceratosaurus is now known to have formed a cladistic family of early tyrannosaurs, which includes Guanlong and the previously mentioned Duratyrant. These smaller theropods were believed to feed on small reptiles and early mammaliforms, whilst possibly scavenging in packs across the floodplains and riverine biomes of Jurassic Europe. The Isle of Wight was one of the first revealed sites, an early Cretaceous formation part of the Wealden group, and many speculators, including myself, had a lot of hope for this site. Eventually it will be home to the Polacanthus and Baryonyx, but there are 2 more names that will be of great asset to the evolution game. The first is a quintessential name in all of dinosaur fandom, Iguanodon. It's so far evaded canon references and even terminated its appearance in Operation Genesis for unknown reasons, probably replaced by the more unique but less famous Oranosaurus. The inclusion of the Isle of Wight, however, gives this dinosaur an amazing opportunity for accurate portrayal, which made it all the more disappointing this species was not in the final roster upon release. Widespread across Europe, we will discuss the Spanish Galvensis species later in the video. Neovenator has quickly become one of the most interesting European carnivores due to its great knowledge from extensive and well-preserved fossils. The new hunter was named because initially it was thought to be a new megalosaur genus. Now Neovenator is distinct enough to be considered closer to Carcharodontosaurus, and the Neovenatoridae family has close relations with the Megaraptorans. With a gracile build, Neovenator was an agile predator, and with the consideration that Baryonyx was probably aquatic and piscivorous, Neovenator was then the apex terrestrial carnivore, and would have readily preyed on Iguanodon. the Isle of Wight, for all intents and purposes, could be an even better site, featuring a reasonable amount of unique, varied but equally famous and requested species. The Wessex Formation is essentially the geological structure the Isle of Wight is a part of, and thus we can expect to see some returning names in Polycanthus and Iguanodon. However, we considered this section of the Wessex Formation to be that on the English mainland near West Sussex, and thus Baryonyx and Neovenator are not part of since they are specifically found on the Isle of Wight. The only other dinosaur worth mentioning here is Hylaeosaurus, the first discovered ankylosaur, and thus it deserves an honourable mention. However, it is still little understood due to fragmentary nature of its holotype, but is described as a typical albeit small nodosaur, not unlike Polycanthus. Whereas Polycanthus had a progressively increasing back spike arrangement, Hylaeosaurus spikes did not start appearing until its rump region, and progressively decreased. Like all nodosaurids, it lacked any tail club. The final UK site is the Smokejack Clay Pit, a site introduced to accommodate the Baryonyx in the Fallen Kingdom patch. It has special significance because it was the first discovery location for the Baryonyx, but otherwise features no other dinosaurs and no changes here are necessary, since it is essentially a part of the greater Wessex Formation. We now move to mainland Europe, starting with the Portuguese Lourinhã Formation, arguably the richest and most productive fossil site on the continent. Due to the Iberian Peninsula being attached to North America and Africa during the Jurassic, the Lourinhã Formation thus has strong paleontological ties with such sites as the Morrison and Tendaguru Formation, giving a blend of the best of both Jurassic continents. In-game, the Lourinhã is currently home to the Ceratosaurus and Stegosaurus, but I also proposed the addition of Allosaurus, as the Europaeus species was found here, and was quite a surprise it wasn't included at this site for the Fallen Kingdom patch. Furthermore, Dacentrurus was also found here. A possibility for inclusion is Megalosaurus due to some dubious remains found here, but most consider them to be invalid and representing other theropod taxon, so this might be a stretch and therefore I'm hesitant to add this as a certainty. Our first is a childhood favourite from Operation Genesis, the Dryosaurus, an animal that has been referenced extensively in novellia and was perceived as one of the favourites for an addition into Jurassic World Evolution. Although more famous at the Morrison Formation, it can equally make an appearance here. Portrayed in the canon and in Operation Genesis as rather nimble and tiny, paleontologists estimate it was actually probably larger due to the only specimens known being subadults, and the actual specimen could reach 5 meters in length. Most modern portrayals also adorn it with a fleshy comb on its head, which is something Frontier can build upon for uniqueness. I find Dryosaurus interchangeable with the more famous ornithopod from this site, Draconix, and also the Calovosaurus, which I mentioned earlier. The second is the beautiful Maragaya, a stegosaur that's gaining acclaim due to its distinct long neck and unique plate formation, featuring small, subtle, but much more numerous triangular shapes. This makes Maragaya one of the standout dinosaurs from this formation and an elegant candidate for inclusion. Our third is a sauropod for the region, and although there were many candidates here, I've chosen the aptly named supersized Supersaurus. Again, another dinosaur that is better known from North American sites. The Portuguese Lourinhãensis species was previously known as Dinhyrosaurus, but reclassified in 2015 to the Supersaurus genus, being about 10 meters shorter in length than its North American brother. Supersaurus regardless is still one of the longest sauropods that have existed, and probably the longest to ever grace the northern continents, and would provide some size competition in-game with the Mamenchisaurus. Finally, we have the fearsome Torvosaurus. At 10 meters in length, this megalosaur was by far the largest Jurassic carnivore in the region, with some estimating the European Guerneae species was even slightly larger than its North American brethren. The top apex predator, Torvosaurus was unrivaled in its environment, and resembled something more along the lines of a Jurassic-era Tyrannosaurus rex. Its addition into the game would place it as the largest candidate on the Jurassic carnivore roster, not to mention being a popular and highly requested dinosaur. Overall, it is quite disappointing for the Lourinhã Formation to be included and only feature 2 dinosaurs that were readily accessible from the other North American sites, so more distinctness in the roster with a fleshy expansion here is required. especially since this locality is home to many interesting species. Over into nearby Spain with the La Joya Formation, which is one of the famous conservate Lagerstätten sites of Europe. This means that fossils here were laid down in very specific environmental conditions that prevent decomposition and thus results in exceptional and near perfect preservation, exhibiting even soft tissue in some cases. As a result, the dinosaurs found at the La Joya are extremely detailed and well studied, not to mention extremely unique in their own right, and would add a depth of flavour not usually seen at other major dig sites. Also, as an early Cretaceous site, it can also harbour the locally found Iberian baryonyx specimens, as well as the Spanish Iguanodon galvensis species. But moving to new additions, we have Ampelosaurus, by no means an exceptionally large sauropod. Instead, Ampelosaurus trades size for armour, protected with a series of spikes and osteoderms that make it resemble a hybrid between ankylosaurs and sauropods. Ampelosaurus is closely related to Nameggdosaurus, a similarly small sauropod cousin from the Mongolian Nameg Formation, and is one of the best known titanosaurs. It, however, does not directly come from the La Joya, as it is being a late Cretaceous creature, instead appearing at the nearby Villalba de la Sierra Formation, but I believe some scientific liberties can be taken to introduce this very unique dinosaur. Continuing our trend of unique dinosaurs is Concavenator, a peculiar dinosaur that has accelerated its Jurassic World popularity due to its secondary role in Fallen Kingdom, appearing as a taxidermied specimen. The creature itself is quite small for a Carcharodontosaurid, reaching only as tall as the average adult human, but that is definitely made up for its striking anatomical features, which include two extremely tall vertebrae on its back, probably supporting a hump or back crest of some sort, whilst its arms featured quill knobs, indicating it may have had some filamentous structures resembling early feathering, or at least quills. In essence, this is an extremely desirable species for flavour representation, and will be a welcome addition to the game. The pelican mimic is another peculiar creature from the formation, and due to excellent preservation, the entire skull structure, including soft body parts, were preserved, showcasing an unusually long and narrow skull with a keratinous small back head crest and a throat pouch, which references its similarities with a modern pelican. Nevertheless, it was quite small and less derived than other members of the later Ornithomimids, but distinct enough to warrant a shout. In conclusion, a very interesting and rich site that would add variety to the European dinosaur roster, as well as increasing the accessibility of two famous dinosaurs. The Langenberg quarry in western Germany is an interesting locality. It is a well-preserved dig site displaying an island ecosystem from the late Jurassic. Like the dinosaurs from the Oxford clay, Langenberg quarry is another example of insular dwarfism, where most of the animals here gradually reduced their size due to the lack of space. Indications of a dwarf species of Torvosaurus also lived on the island, until a land bridge opened due to the dropping sea levels, introducing larger theropods, and probably resulted in the wiping out of the native island population. Europasaurus was one of these dwarfs, an exceptionally small brachiosaur that is known from many specimens that include tooth and bite marks, of which fish and crocodilians are also present. Whilst tiny, Europasaurus was probably still the dominant large herbivore in its environment, with various diplodocid and stegosaurian material from the location indicating other coexisters. There were also 4 types of identified theropods Europasaurus had to fend off, including a dwarf Torvosaurus, and indeterminate members of the Allosaur, Ceratosaur, and Velociraptorinae families. The nearby Compsognathus probably lived in this environment as well, and judging by its extent across Europe, it was probably quite widespread. There's really not much to say here. We all know the Compy is very much ingrained in the Jurassic Park universe, and hopefully it can be implemented in a useful way in the near future, regardless of its size. This site is decent in that it opens up a second location to access the iconic Torvosaurus and allows possibilities for a famous small sauropod and one of the most iconic small dinosaurs in the Jurassic Park franchise. The Löwenstein is the earliest formation chosen for Europe at 215 million years ago in the Neurian age of the late Triassic, situated in southwestern Germany. It contains a host of decently preserved Triassic dinosaurs, but two important names for consideration. The first of which is Plateosaurus, probably the most famous Triassic dinosaur and the archetypal prosauropod. As we know, prosauropods are seriously underrepresented in Jurassic Park media, and I'd hope that would change with Jurassic World Evolution finally introducing this iconic species. It would be nice to include animations to provide for both bipedal feeding and quadrupedal wandering stances. This is more of an honourable mention because Compsognathus is much higher priority for me, and the fact this slightly smaller species adds nothing really different. However, Compsognathus had crucial roles in both the Jurassic Park and the Lost World novels by Crichton, where they were known as the fictional Amazicus species, and were eventually phased out for the Compsognathus in the movie universe. They were the first dinosaurs ever introduced and were the cause of Hammond's death in the novel. Contrary to their name, they are actually considered part of the Saurophysid family, and extremely similar to another small Jurassic Park carnivore in Stegosaurus. So yes, an honourable mention due to strong links in the lore, but a forgettable creature otherwise with too much overlap and size issues. Onto our final site in Europe proper, another German formation in the Trossingen. It overlies the Löwenstein and is thus of later age, extending into the Raythean age. The Plateosaurus also appears here, as it is ever present over most of Triassic Europe. Liliensternus is a predecessor to the early Jurassic Dilophosaurus, similarly built and adorned two double crests that were briefer than the latter. A good explanation of this creature is that it can be considered an intermediary between Saurophysis and Dilophosaurus. At more than 5 meters in length, it was one of the largest Triassic carnivorous dinosaurs and probably the largest in Europe, and was capable of feeding on the prosauropods at the time, including Plateosaurus. Liliensternus can therefore be seen as one of the first true apex predatory theropods. In our final site analysis, we move to Eurasia. Here the Bisecti formation lies in Uzbekistan and contains the Archaeoniphomimus, but no more introductions here are necessary. Instead, our final site is the Itat formation in Siberia. Home to the Kilescus, to finish off our list on a high. As Cryolophosaurus dominated the Jurassic Antarctic, the equally unique Kilescus dominated the Arctic. Assigned to the Proceratosaurs, making it relatives of Guanlong, it adorned a similarly remarkable crest. Kilescus would have been the apex predator in its environment, preying on the local stegosaurs and mamenchisaurs that have yet to be identified. This ends our species speculative list for Jurassic World Europe. These are the dinosaurs I consider most worthy or most likely to grace the Jurassic World Evolution game in the future. We continue our series looking at the continent of Africa next. Until then. I'd like to give a shout out to my Patreon supporters. If you enjoy my content and wish to support me further, check out my Patreon link in the description.